This is a People First Radio podcast.
The muskox is an animal known for coming together in a circle to protect calves from danger. That behavior inspired Mountain Muskox, an organization with a number of chapters in BC and Alberta that seeks to bring together community to support and care for those who have been impacted by loss or trauma in the mountains. Like muskoxen in the wild, mountain muskox groups come together in circles where mountain community members join with professional facilitators to create a support network. Lexie Morgan is one of the professional facilitators involved in the Sea to Sky chapter of Mountain Muskox. I spoke with her about the group and about mental health in the backcountry.
My name is Lexie Morgan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a registered clinical counselor based in Vancouver, BC. And I do lots of work here in Vancouver with individuals through my private counseling practice, Montira Mental Health, where I see adults in person as well as virtually across the province, focusing on an array of issues and challenges ranging from relationship dynamics, life and career direction. I work a lot with students. My office is really close to the UBC campus. But on top of all of that, I would say I have this kind of section of my work that really focuses on workplace mental health and mental health like literacy for the tourism and ski industry, as well as like adventure-based work environments, kind of more rural and remote areas. And then I do a lot of work up and down the Sea to Sky region, as well as in the interior, working with organizations like Helicat Canada, the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, various heli ski operators. And then a big part of my work is also with an organization called Mountain Muskox, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about. And this all is sort of connected to kind of my own lived experience of living and working in mountain communities, managing heli ski lodges as well as remote lodges, and just having a real passion for working with folks kind of in that space. Yeah, I can speak more to that, but that's a little bit of an overview of kind of who I am, what my work is, and where I work and how I do it.
And we're going to be talking about mental health in the backcountry. Mountain Muskox. What is the story behind that organization? What does it do?
Yeah, so Mountain Muskox is a relatively new organization. It was founded, I believe, in 2021 by a group of folks in the Bow Valley, kind of Canmore Banff area in Alberta. It was sort of the brainchild of a group of individuals, both professional athletes as well as recreationalists and mental health professionals, who really recognized this kind of social isolation that comes after someone might experience a traumatic event, a near miss, an injury, or loss in the outdoors. And it was really formulated to try and turn folks towards each other in a space of healing and shared understanding, recognizing that, especially in mountain communities, but not specifically to mountain communities, but in those spaces, when someone had experienced a traumatic event, a near miss, a loss, when that's the place that you maybe work, like the mountains can be a place that you work or recreate, spend time, socialize, find peace and grounding, when it's challenging to get back out there and to spend time with others because of what's happened to you, there can just be an immense amount of loneliness, can impact your mental health. So the idea was really to just get folks together so that they could talk about what their experiences were like, understand and make sense of what had happened. There was no emphasis on like returning folks to their sport or to their work, but more just kind of understanding that trauma, healing, mental health, all the associated aspects of that can really look different for everyone, and then also have sort of through lines of similarity. So the idea was fairly simple. It was just bring people together, have it professionally facilitated by counselors and mental health professionals, so that, you know, kind of understanding the like sensitive nature of a topic like trauma, really wanting to make sure there was some containment around that work, and spend time together. And so that, that happened. I believe they kind of did a one-off circle, and then it was kind of like, whoa, this is pretty powerful and important. I wonder if we could kind of more clearly structure this, and then how do we sort of expand this into other mountain communities? So that was kind of the origin of Muskox. And then I'm happy to talk more about what it's kind of now evolved into, but that was the beginning.
What do you think are the parts of this that someone who hasn't necessarily spent a significant amount of time in the backcountry might have a harder time relating with or getting or understanding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think that we talk a lot. My colleague who I co-facilitate some of these circles with, she describes it really beautifully of like when there is an accident, near miss, traumatic event in the backcountry or in the outdoors, for the individual, there can be this kind of tear, this rupture that happens between the individual and the land, between the individual and their community, if they're with other people, and then a tear between the individual with themselves, because sometimes it can feel like, what did I do? What were my sort of, what was my responsibility, decision making, sense of self and identity can really be impacted. And I think that if you haven't spent time living, working, recreating in the backcountry in the mountains, it can be difficult to maybe understand kind of why it would be so devastating to not have access to those spaces anymore, to feel like maybe why it was so difficult to not feel like you could go for a hike or go ski touring or go rock climbing again. If you haven't really been sort of embedded in those spaces, it can be a type of loss that can feel hard to capture for maybe the average person who hasn't spent time in those places. So there's a lot of kind of uniqueness there. And I think for a lot of folks who have something happen in the backcountry, goes from being this like very sort of sacred, wonderful, magical, joy-filled space where they get a lot of like peace and grounding and exercise and social connection. It can be a place that goes from being really, really beneficial to a place that can feel scary and not what it used to be. And that shift, that tear is really hard. It also really, the identity piece, the community piece, it maybe is where they socialize. So I think that's what we're sort of seeing with folks coming to Muskox is they're looking for that kind of connection and understanding of that experience, which is really unique.
Which brings us to the circles that happen at Mountain Muskox. Could you tell me a little bit about what those are like?
Absolutely. So the concept of the circle, and I should also sort of go back to actually the name of the organization, Mountain Muskox. So the muskoxen is a type of animal that when one of them are injured, the rest of the muskoxen circle around them to protect the injured muskox. So the concept of muskox is to kind of bring folks into this idea of a circle, the concept of, healing and protecting, recognizing when somebody is, injured, either physically or emotionally, that we're there as kind of this group. So circles typically happen once a month. We have circles in the Bow Valley, in Golden, in the Kootenays, in Squamish, and we're running a pilot circle in Whistler. And they are professionally facilitated by counselors, as I mentioned, and they're typically about 3 hours long, which can sound a bit long at first. But the reasoning for why they're long or why that length of time is because we do a lot of work to kind of call it like build the container, effectively like when someone arrives at a circle, I would say circles really range in size. They can be, from maybe like 7, 8 folks, plus usually 2 facilitators, up to about maybe 14 individuals, but we try and keep them around that size. The sort of building of the container, as I was mentioning, is the facilitators really working to make sure that folks kind of know what to expect. There's introductions, there's grounding, there's kind of parameters and rules that we go through each session to make sure that people kind of understand what they can expect from the circle. So what you would find if you attended a circle, at least in the Sea to Sky in Squamish, where I facilitate, and in Whistler, is a group of individuals sitting around in a space. We would do a short check-in where folks would introduce themselves. We do a color rating system. So like, are you arriving at circle today feeling green, yellow, or red? Green feeling really resourced, yellow feeling a little in the middle, or red feeling like lower energy. That helps us kind of understand what the energy of the circle is. Folks would, introduce themselves. Myself and the co-facilitator would kind of go through these parameters. We don't have folks explicitly share details about their trauma, traumatic events. It's not group therapy. It's really a peer-to-peer support model. There's an element of confidentiality that happens. So we make an agreement that, what's shared in circle isn't to be sort of shared more broadly. And then there's also kind of this agreement that we're going to always speak from I, like, what I have found helpful for me is blank, and not do a lot of advice giving. And then typically myself and the co-facilitator will have come up with a theme or a topic for the circle. Usually there's an element of kind of bigger group sharing or breakout groups, smaller groups kind of centered around that topic. And then we usually have a bit of a break and we come back and we do what we would call like psychoeducation. So this would be like a tool that myself or the co-facilitator would kind of share with the group. We would go through it. They might, have some dialogue around it. The tool is often to do with kind of like coping, regulating, making sense and understanding kind of how our bodies and nervous systems react to trauma, different, models around grief. So that the topic and the psychoeducation are a piece of wanting to make sure that folks feel like they're kind of learning and making sense of what happened to them, even though we can't always make sense of it, because sometimes these things don't make sense. And then there's a checkout. There's this opportunity to kind of say how you're doing leaving the space, and sort of do that kind of color-coded system again to be like, where am I at leaving, right? And sometimes people leave a little bit more depleted because it's been a big, evening of sharing, and other times people leave feeling a little bit lighter. And so, we're really there to kind of hold any type of emotion or response or experience. So it's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of an overview of what you can expect from a circle and kind of the premise of it. It's the idea of being in circle together is a way of co-regulating, right? It's a way of anchoring to other nervous systems, of sort of turning towards one another. And in that sort of spirit of the muskox and that sort of idea of community as being a resource.
You're listening to People First Radio. My guest is Lexie Morgan. She's a registered clinical counselor based in Vancouver. She's involved with the organization Mountain Muskox. It's a community to support and care for those who have been impacted by loss or trauma in the mountains. She is involved with the Sea to Sky chapter of Mountain Muskox, which meets in Squamish. What have you seen the circles be able to do for people? What have some of the results been for folks who have come in?
Yeah. So, I think anecdotally, I've watched folks who have arrived at circle pretty soon after an accident or a traumatic event and come really consistently to circle and find an immense amount of support and care through the range of emotions and challenges that come through the anger, the upset, the confusion, the grief. And Muskox is a place where you can show up and be any version of yourself. We don't need you to have all the answers, to know what you need necessarily. But, I think that we call it the third M, Mountain Muskox mentorship. So mentorship is a key component of our work. And, having folks, it's a really unique system, right? So it's not a closed group. Anybody can register at any time. So we have folks who have been coming consistently to circles for years. We have folks who've been coming, for a couple of months. And often you're seeing the folks who are really at a maybe a different place in their healing, in their self-work, being able to offer support to the folks who are very kind of newly going through this. And actually, at our most recent circle, I just was able to witness this so beautifully. We had quite a few newer folks pretty recently, fresh out of some events and accidents, with some folks who are, months, if not years, kind of into that process. And to see the gentleness, the compassion, the hope holding that happens with our group is pretty transformative. I don't know a lot of spaces like this and a lot of groups that are modeled like this. A lot of times you're going to see groups that are kind of closed, meaning it's the same group of people week after week or month after month. But because of that kind of open door evolution of involvement, you get to see the kind of trajectory of healing. It's a place where people report feeling really understood, really the only place where they feel like they can talk openly, the only place where they feel like they have any sense of hope of feeling better or feeling differently. I think it complements really nicely with kind of maybe one-on-one therapy or sort of healing processes, because it is that community kind of co-regulation and support. So yeah, I would say I've seen lots of amazing things happen in Circle.
If we're zooming out of that and we're talking about just mental health on a level of anyone in any place in any time, are there any, important nuggets you think you could share that are broadly applicable that come out of the experience of Mountain Muskox?
Yeah, I think that there is something so impactful and powerful about not feeling alone in your experience. And to hear participants say over and over again something to the effect of, wow, I didn't think anybody understood this, or I felt worried that I was the only one that felt this way, or I never thought I would feel differently about what had happened. And, I think what Muskox is doing and achieving in this really sort of specific space of mountain communities, I think translates more broadly to this idea of like isolation and aloneness in mental health and trauma. I think we could see a lot more come from being able to connect folks to one another that, especially if you've had a similar experience, whatever it may be. I had done some work in grief and loss and hospice organizations, and, seeing folks brought together in kind of, group spaces, that often is the sentiment. And I think that, we tend to be a pretty individualist culture, maybe more broadly speaking, and, trying to find ways to connect folks to one another, however that might be, is really important. And I think Muskox does that in a way that's free, it's accessible, it's confidential, it's professionally facilitated, but it's also sort of specialized to this one group. There's a lot going on there that I think really makes it what it is. And this sort of emphasis around like, let us help you turn towards other people, so that you might not feel so alone in your experience.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation today on this?
I mean, I think as it pertains to Muskox, if you or anyone you know you think might benefit from being a part of this programming, please don't hesitate to reach out. I think that it can maybe feel intimidating at first, the length of time, the kind of like concept of sitting with other people. You don't have to have experienced a traumatic event or near miss or loss recently. We've had folks who come, 4 or 5 years after something's happened because they feel called to be kind of in the space with other people. If you have any questions about if it's something that would work for you or somebody you know, you can always reach out and we will help you kind of decision make through that. And, it's an amazing opportunity to connect to other people who really understand it.
Lexie Morgan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Lexie Morgan is a registered clinical counselor based in Vancouver. She's involved with the Sea to Sky chapter of a group called Mountain Muskox, which meets in Squamish. The organization is a community to support and care for those who have been impacted by loss or trauma in the mountains.
People First Radio, People First Media, and People First Stories are community media projects of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society and are produced in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society or its broadcast, podcast, and social media partners.